Good morning. My discussion for today is Module 9, Political Social Conflict Theories of Crime Causation. So first, Marxist criminology. Marxist criminology is a theory that attempts to explain crime through the prism of Marxism. Marxist criminology say during the struggle for resources in capitalism, crime emerges as those on the bottom contend for social, political, and economic equality. Marx contends that capitalism as a mode of production is the only system that separates the product, like wealth and resources, from the natural distribution of that product. In all other societies, the product is generated to migrate to the needy and not be hoarded by those on top. So, yung mga product na yon, okay, binibigay yon sa mga needy, yung mga nangangailangan. Hindi kinukuha ng mga nasa taas or ng mga mayayaman. In a capitalist society, those on the top pay as little as possible to their workers, thus choking the flow of products to the needy. It's this unmet need created by the capitalist that drives those at the bottom to resort to crime. So, yan yung Marxist criminology natin. Wealth and resources. Ang pinag-uusapan dyan, rich versus the poor. Kasi nga, sabi diyan, yung mga nasa taas, mas nagbabayad sila ng mas less kaysa yung mga nagtatrabaho. Violent crime, for those in power, violence is the ultimate threat to control those without power. Property seizure and incarceration is the threat for those who disobey. So for Marx, it's no surprise then that violence is a means for the distribution of that wealth by those willing to engage in violence. For example, sketchy shall commit crime to make or to take what he has been deprived of. Sketchy Sal has been excluded from the modes of production and has no choice but to turn to violence to physically redistribute society's product to those who don't have. Even the definition of crime is influenced by the top to help institutionalize those that don't comply. So, nakapag-commit siya ng crime dahil sa kagustuhan niyang makuha yung product na yun para ibigay doon sa mga nangangailangan. Next, political crime. The struggle for political power pits the powerful against those wanting that power. The political structure of any capitalist society is crafted to maintain those positions of wealth and power, and criminal laws are likewise crafted to protect those on top. For example, Mayor Margie was attempting to break into the local power structure. So she was charged for promising a position in her government to someone for their support, which is violation of a rarely used influence peddling law. So, itong si Mayor Margie, okay, inattempt niyang i-break yung local power structure. Nag-promise siya ng isang posisyon para doon sa tao na yon para lang tulungan siya. So, ganun ang political crime. Economic crime, in the same vein of political crime, economic rules and laws are decided by those in power. And if someone becomes an economic threat, then those on top will use their economic influence to remove or punish those who threaten the status quo. For example, greedy gas bought up numerous telecommunication companies that rivaled those in existence for decades. This upset those on top who leveled their influence on the system, and Gredigas was charged with antitrust violation. So, itong si Gredigas, okay, bumili siya ng mga numerous telecommunication companies para uh, kalabanin yung mga nag-e-exit na for decades. So, dahil nga nasa taas sila, syempre, nasa sa kanila pa rin yung power. So, itong si Gredigas, na-charge siya with anti-trust violence. Next, conflict theory. Conflict theory is a set of criminological theories that holds that those in society who possess the social and economic power. The ruling class define antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior result from class conflict and social economic inequality. The ruling class uses the criminal law and the criminal justice system to protect their interests and to control the lower class. Conflict theory consists of the conflict theoretical perspective, the critical theoretical perspective, and the feminist theoretical perspective. So, ganyan naman sa conflict theory natin. Okay? Social and economic power. Ruling class ang nangunguna dyan sa conflict theory. Next, social reality of crime theory. In the social reality of crime, for example, he concluded that public conceptions of crime are constructed in the political arena to serve political purposes, taking a neo-Marxist approach in the critique of legal order. He introduced a theory of legal order intended to demystify. Richard Queen's The Social Reality of Crime remains an eloquent and important statement on crime, law, and justice. At the time of its appearance in 1970, Queen's theory not only liberated the field from a recitation of the practices of the police, courts, and correction. It also represented a marked departure from traditional analysis which viewed criminal behavior as pathological. He embraced a conflict model of crime who integrated his belief about power, society, and criminality into a theory he referred to as the social reality of crime. According to him, criminal definitions of the law represents the interest of those who hold power in society, where there is conflict between social groups. For example, the wealthy and the power, those who hold power will be the ones to create the laws that benefit themselves. So, the wealthy and the poor, those who hold power, syempre, kailan naman natin kung sino ang nakahawak sa power. Syempre, yung mga wealthy person will be the ones to create the laws. So, sila yung magbibigay or gagawa ng laws that benefit themselves. Sila na yung gagawa ng law na yon na magbe-benefit pa rin para sa kanila. Next, left realism. Left realism is just one political ideology that focuses on the causes of crime and deviance. Left realists believe that living in a capitalistic society, a society where private entities control trade and industry instead of the state, is the main cause of crime. In a capitalistic society, there is cultural inclusions, meaning that everyone who lives within this society can pursue the ideals and concepts under capitalism. Essentially, they are consumers, however, most are economically excluded, meaning that they can afford the things that others can to be relevant in a capitalistic society. Therefore, those who are economically excluded resort to crime and deviant behavior to fill the void left by not being able to buy all the crap that advertising tells them they should. Reasons for crime. There are three major reasons for people to commit crimes. So, meron daw tatlong rason kung bakit nakakapag-commit ang tao ng krimen. Again, the primary consideration for left realists are those individuals who are economically excluded. Usually, this means poor or minorities. Relative desperation, subculture, and marginalization are the three factors that contribute to crime and deviance according to left realists. These three factors create the criminogenic triangle, and each factor works off another to create a criminal or deviant motivation. So, ito na yung tatlo. Relative deprivation, marginalization, and subculture. Relative deprivation. The rise of social media has made this factor the front runner for developing a criminal perspective. More people are exposed to advertising and consumerist propaganda, and at the same time, they are continually exposed to how much they don't have or can acquire by seeing all the things everybody else does. This constant bombardment of the unattainable is economic exclusion. So, yan yung sa relative deprivation natin. Sa marginalization naman, essentially, this is what happens when groups and demographics of people are left without a voice. Consider the Black Lives Matter movement. This was started because African Americans felt that they were not being treated as fairly as white. So, yun ang yung pagkakaiba, lalong-lalo na sa African Americans, kasi hindi daw sila treat fairly as white Americans. Subculture, this is as a marginalization, kung napanood nyo yung Hidden Figures, meron doon. Meron yung mga Black Americans na hindi rin sila tinuturing na Americans. What I mean is meron silang sariling banyo as Black Americans, and also meron ding sariling banyo yung white Americans. Ganon din sa mga coffee, yung mga coffee machine, meron din. May nakalagay. Kung mapapanood nyo yung Hidden Figures, maiintindihan nyo kung ano yung tinatawag nating marginalization. Subculture, this is an acceptance of resorting to illegal means to attain desires. Theft, drug dealing, robbery, all become a way of life in some of the communities that are suffering from economic exclusion. At the top of the triangle is relative deprivation, which creates a feeling of political marginalization. This in turn develops a subculture or like-minded individuals who accept criminality and deviant behavior as a way of life. So, yan yung tatlo na rason kung bakit nakakagawa ng krimen ang isang tao. So, number 5, postmodern criminology, postmodern theory. As much as modern criminology is a rejection of the classical concept of morality and free will, postmodern criminology is a rejection of modern criminology's adherence to reason, rationality, and the scientific process as a means to understand crime. Postmodernists point to the emergence of racism, sexism, imperialism, and class exploitation resultant of the progress made in the name of modernism, scientific search for truth as a proof of its failure. So, ganyan naman dito sa postmodern criminology. Next, constitutive criminology. Constitutive criminology is a subfield of critical criminology that takes a holistic approach to crime and its control, while redefining crime as expressions of power that harm others. Constitutive criminology explains crime as the outcome of the interplay of micro and macro relations of power. The approach argues that crime is a co-production of human agent, discursive construction, and the kinds of cultures, and structures they create based on these constructed realities. The theory has been applied to explain different crimes and gain popularity among critical scholars in the late 1990s. Those interests declined since 2005 as the theory became subject to criticism, not least from other critical criminologists. So dito sa constitutive criminology natin, ini-explain nila yung outcome ng micro and macro relations of power. Next, a new definition of crime. Classicalists and modernists both view crime is the breaking of the law, but crime itself should be conceptualized differently to reflect individuals' interaction within a very complex social structure. Breaking a law is a definition of crime should be replaced by the notion that a crime occurs when people use power to cause others harm. Two types of harm are addressed. Dalawang types of harm. We have harm of reduction and harm of repression. Harm of reduction, power used to cause a victim to experience some sort of loss or immediate injury. This can include violent crime where one uses physical force to harm other or to take something. It can also be the larger societal system or power causing people immediate loss by asserting their authority. So, itong harm of reduction, okay, gumagamit or nandito yung violent crime. Gumagamit sila ng physical force to harm other or take something. Next, harm of repression. Power used to restrict others' future development. This can be where an individual is forced to succumb to the will of another, such as human trafficking, or it can be the power structures within a society as that create an environment where some are cut off from the resources needed to develop. Once these paradigms are expressed through language and discourse, then a society can begin healing itself and take on a larger role in crime prevention by not tolerating the harm society metes out to its individual. This will create less reliance on police and the conventional power structure, allowing people more freedom and less oppression. So, yan yung dalawa. Harm of reduction and harm of repression. Next, conservatism and liberalism liberalism theory. Conservatism and its modernizing anti-traditionalist rivals, liberalism and socialism, are the most influential political philosophies and ideologies of the most Enlightenment era. Conservatives criticize their rivals for making an utopian exaggeration of the power of theoretical reason and of human perfectibility. Conservative prescriptions are based on what they regard as experience rather than reason. For them, the ideal and the practical are inseparable. Most commentators regard conservatism as a modern political philosophy, even though it exhibits the standpoint of paternalism or authority. Rather than freedom, as John Gray writes, while liberalism is the dominant political theory of the modern age, conservatism, despite appealing to tradition, is also a response to the challenges of modernity. The roots of all three standpoints may be traced back to the crisis of 17th century England, but they crystallize into definite traditions of thought and practice only after the French Revolution. So, ganyan po sa conservatism. Sa liberalism naman is a defining feature of modern democracy. Mas gusto kasi nila ang conservatism kaysa sa liberalism. So, feature of modern democracy illustrated by the prevalence of the term liberal democracy as a way to describe countries with free and fair election, rule of law, and protected civil liberties. Liberalism contains a variety of concepts and arguments about how institutions, behaviors, and economic connections contain and mitigate the violent power of states. So, dito naman sa liberalism, okay, nandito yung institutions, behavior, and economic connections contain para ma-mitigate yung violent power ng state. Next, radical theory and social conflict theory. Radical criminology is a conflict ideology which bases its perspective on crime and law in the belief that capitalist societies precipitate and define crime as the owners of the means of production use their power to enact laws that will control the working class and repress threats to the power of the ruling class in the view of radical criminology. The solution to the crime problem is to overthrow capitalist systems and establish social systems where class and economic conflict is eliminated. Social conflict theories, on the other hand, while sharing radical criminology's view that crime is defined by laws enacted by power groups who wish to control behavior, that challenges their values and interests, maintain that this underlying dynamic of law-making is characteristic of all large, complex societies where groups with varying values and interests compete in the arenas of power to enact laws that will challenge threats to their ways of life, whereas the radical criminologists have an ideological base for their criminological principles. The social conflict theories purport to base their theories in empirically based sociological studies. So, dito sa radical theory and social conflict, okay, so the solution of crime problem is to overthrow capitalist system. So, kailangan nilang tanggalin, i-overthrow yung capitalist system para makapag-establish sila ng social system where class and economic conflict is eliminated. So, once na nakapag-establish sila ng social system, yung economic conflict and so class and economic conflict is mai-eliminate. Cultural confusion theory or cultural fusion theory. This theory borrows from various theoretical frameworks to provide a more realistic description of the immigrant experience. Specifically, cultural fusion theory describes how newcomers acculturate into the dominant culture and maintain aspects of their minority culture, while at the same time, the dominant or host culture also fuses aspects of the newcomer's culture into the dominant culture to create a false intercultural identity boundary conditions, assumptions, axioms, and theorisms are presented to define cultural fusion theory. So, pagsasama. Okay, pagsasama-sama, fusion. So, yan ang cultural fusion theory. So, that was the end of my Module 9 discussion. Thank you and God bless.